While President Trump and his national security team continue to try and work on issues to have a ceasefire in the war between Russia and Ukraine, especially the limited one right now about the Black Sea issues and the limited no fire zone on the energy infrastructures of both sides, there still is a lot of daylight between the Western side with the United States, Europe, and Ukraine, which could threaten to continue to undo any of these peace efforts that President Trump is trying to get done with Vladimir Putin. Now, that's bad news, especially for the Ukraine side and the men and women who are fighting and dying in this war every day. And it's going to be bad for really even for Europe and definitely for the rest of Ukraine. There's going to be a lot of issues here that's going to have to be resolved by the Trump administration. He is getting closer to a position to where he's going to have to make some hard unilateral decisions about where we're going to go if the West can't come in line with where he's trying to lead them. He may be having to come to a point to where he says, this is what I'm willing to do. Get on board or you've got it. You're going to be on your own because we're not going to participate in something that is going to be a deepening an already losing position. And I think he's getting closer to that situation as a means of example here. So Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, was not long ago in the White House and was talking very congenially with Trump in the Oval Office. The conversations were good. They seem to be on the same sheet of music. But while Trump is continuing to say, we want this war over, we want to stop the killing, we want to end the destruction of the Ukraine side, we want to try and get the best deal for Ukraine that we can get, they're still talking about this whole coalition of the willing thing and using very, very provocative and antagonistic language like this earlier today from Poland.
When it comes to the defense of Poland and the general defense of NATO territory, if anyone were to miscalculate and think they can get away with an attack on Poland or on any other ally, they will be met with the full force of this fierce alliance. Our reaction will be devastating. This has to be very clear to Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and anyone else who wants to attack us. In an increasingly dangerous world, boosting defense spending is essential. Let's not forget that Russia is and is remaining the most significant and direct threat to our alliance. Let's not forget that Russia is moving into a wartime economy, and that will have a huge impact on their capacity and capability to build their armed forces.
Yeah, a few things about that, Mark. You talk about Russia is boosting their defense spending, or that the West side needs to boost its defense spending, and that one of the reasons is because Russia is and remains in a wartime economy, and therefore they're basically the pacing threat in there. Why do you suppose that is? What was Russia's level of defense spending, say, in February 2022? What had it been all in the decade or so prior to that? How far had their armed forces developed from the dissolution of the Soviet Union until that time? And where was it going after that? It had basically plateaued out at somewhere around 900,000 total active forces. That's where they were at the time. And they were basically a territorial defense force. They were worried about their borders. They didn't have the capacity to go and invade NATO. Didn't even have the possibility of doing that. In fact, as we saw when they actually did invade into Ukraine, they did it with a contingent that was way too small to actually conquer a country of that size, because it was never intended to. They took a more than a risk, a gamble the Russians did, that show of force would be enough to cause the Ukraine government to capitulate and to have the agreement that they had been trying to get with the Minsk agreements or the December 2021 new agreement to basically say, just declare neutrality. There's not going to be any NATO. And then take care of the Russian speakers inside the borders of Ukraine. That was their main threats at the time, or their main demands at the time. It wasn't territorial concessions. It was those issues right there. Now then, once Russia has invaded because they didn't get what they considered to be the security on their western flank, all of a sudden now we've got the war that we have, and then all of a sudden things expand. And then where was the Russian side then, even in the end of April 2022, at the time that they tried to get this over with negotiated settlement? Russia tried to end it. And I'll remind you, Mark, if you're not aware, that at that time, the only thing Russia was talking about were the two provinces of Luhansk and Donetsk, which they had already recognized as Russian territory. At that time, that's all they were talking about. So there would have been a moratorium. One of the things that was under the discussion was even even Crimea would be addressed in 15 years. They said, we'll just kind of put that off on the long burner, but there will be neutrality for Ukraine. There will be limited independence for the Russian speakers in the rest of the place. And there would be, of course, neutrality for Ukraine. All of those things were on the table then. The Russian military itself was still not in anything close to being a wartime economy. Now they are, because the West had this 50 nations coalition of the willing, that was allied against them. All the stuff that we've given them, the long-range weapons, air power, air defense systems, tanks, artillery, you name it, all the things, the training, intelligence support, all those things that we've given them. Then all of a sudden, now, because of all that, now they have this big threat here. So you're trying to say, hey, we're going to sound tough, and this fierce alliance is going to just chew you up if you don't do what we tell you. And does he think that that's going to scare him into submission, or that's going to make Russia go, oh, well, golly, I didn't know that, Mark. Now that you point that out, I don't want that fierce animal coming at me. Listen, the West views, the Russians view the West with contempt right now and embarrassment. They don't view them as a fierce organization, because unlike the Russians, which Mark accurately talked about, they do in fact have a wartime economy. It's still what they call the special military operations, because it is short of a full-on military mobilization of their entire country. It can get a lot bigger, but right now it is a sustained element where it can sustain this level of operations indefinitely. So that is the case here, where they can do ammunition, weapons, and armored vehicles, the maintenance that goes along with that, the support, logistics, all of those kinds of things. They can maintain the current level of operations virtually indefinitely. The NATO side, on the other hand, does not and cannot. See, this is part of the problem of sounding tough and trying to make these big, in-your-face threats, is that if you're putting the Russians in a position to where they may go, I can see that your rate of advancement, the rate that you can produce weapons, the rate at which you can produce ammunition, the weakness of your overall economy, the lack of interest of significant portions of NATO and even wanting to have this war, more and more wanting to shut it down. I think that this might be the time to strike, because we already have a wartime economy. You don't. And it would take a year and a half at the absolute best case scenario, more like two or 3 years, if we could go. And then, of course, that would raise the prospect and the specter that this thing could go nuclear, because one of the things I always argue about that I think the Russians underestimate is what a frightened Europe can do. And that's primarily talking about Britain and France, because they have nuclear weapons. If they saw that they were losing militarily, they may be resorted to using those weapons. And that's something that I hope the Russians don't ever put to the test. But these kinds of statements only make that more possible. That's one of the things that has animated President Trump from the beginning. He's just like thunders from the White House. You may recall during that infamous disaster with Volodymyr Zelensky, when Trump emphatically thundered out, we are not going to risk World War III. If anybody had any doubts about whether that's really what he meant, he said it many times, but that's really, you saw from the gut level, he is motivated on wanting to avoid that. NATO seems to be not motivated by that. They seem to be wanting to continue to play around the edges of it. In fact, Zelensky earlier today showed up in Paris and had a photo op with Macron, and they're talking about a lot of issues, and apparently there's going to be a military meeting tomorrow in Paris about this coalition of the willing and what they're going to do. So you keep sending from the West side signals to the Russian side that we're not interested in peace. We're not interested in finding a negotiated settlement in the war. We're interested in building up military power. So what do you think that's going to do to the side that currently has the military advantage right now, that has the economic and the industrial capacity advantage right now, and the manpower advantage right now, and the motivation? I assure you, if you're paying any attention at all to what the Russian population and the Russian fighters right now, their motivation is through the roof. It's never been higher than at any point during this war, not even in the beginning, because I think there was a lot of uncertainty and lack of confidence, even among the fighters at the beginning. They weren't sure how good they were. They weren't sure what the plan was, and had a lot of disasters from the beginning. Those things are pretty much in the past now. They are now much more confident in what they're doing. They're much more competent in how they're conducting operations. And a lot of evidence continues to pile up that the Russians are getting ready for bigger operations. There's evidence in both the south and in the north that Russia's preparing larger scale offensive operations in the spring, which literally could come at any time. I mean, we're just a number of days away from April, and the weather is already starting to change to become more conducive to cross-country traffic in some of these areas around the fields and the forested areas. Those are the things that are going on right now, and why there's a big disparity between where the two sides are. Now, specifically on the disparity between the United States and the Ukraine side, it is going to talk about where this is going. Aside from these temporary ceasefires they're trying to get to put into place now, that they want to get to a point to where this is a full ceasefire and then to an end of negotiated war deal. So all those things are working concurrently at the U.S. and at the Russian perspective. They're definitely not working in coordination on the Ukraine side. We still have Zelensky pushing back on a lot of these things and not wanting to agree to virtually anything here. He keeps pushing back even on this ceasefire right now that, it depends on who you ask, has already gone into effect or may go into effect tomorrow on the 26th of March. You have the Russian side basically saying, okay, we've already agreed to this. They've released documents to that effect. They're ready to start doing it right now, especially in the Black Sea with some of their fertilizers and some of their foodstuffs. They want to have that move through. The Ukraine side wants to do the same thing. So they say, okay, we're ready to go. Then there's still talk about the ceasefire on the energy infrastructure, a little bit more unclear on that from the three different parties, the Ukraine, United States, and the Russian side. So there's uncertainty on a lot of that. And of course, we've had a lot of, even in the beginning days since the first agreement between Trump and Putin, on both sides of the line of contact, there has been attacks on energy infrastructure, et cetera. So those are kind of some of the problems there. Now, that's just with the ceasefire issue, whether the limited one or trying to get to a full 30-day ceasefire here. When you start talking about why those ceasefires are going to be put into place so that you can get to the end of war negotiations, there is an even bigger gulf between where the two sides are. Now, that's in this case, when I say the two sides, I'm talking about the U.S. and Ukraine, because between the U.S. and Russia, it's narrowing. It's actually getting closer here. And just to give you an idea, this is you may recall from last week, Steve Wit, Trump's envoy to this trying to solve this war, was visiting on Tucker Carlson, and one of the big issues he was asked about was the central issue to the war is land.
First of all, I think the largest issue in that conflict are these so-called four regions: Donbass,
yes.
Crimea, the names
Lugansk, yeah.
Lugansk, and there's two others. They're Russian-speaking.
Yep.
There have been referendums where the overwhelming majority of the people have indicated that they want to be under Russian rule.
Yes.
I think that's the key issue in the conflict. So that's the first thing. That when that gets settled, and we're having very, very positive conversations.
And Russia controls that. In fact, some of those territories are now, from the Russian perspective, part of Russia.
Correct. That's correct. But this has always been the issue,
right?
And it's sort of no one wants to talk about it. That's the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is there are constitutional issues within Ukraine as to what they can concede to with regard to giving up territory. The Russians are de facto in control of these territories.
Yes.
The question is, will they be? Will the world acknowledge that those are Russian territories? Will it end up? Can Zelensky survive politically if he acknowledges this? This is the central issue in the conflict.
That's always been the central or one of the central issues in the conflict. And for at least the last year, it has been absolutely what is the line since June of last summer, to be specific. That's when Putin first detailed precisely the territory he was talking about. That's always been at front and center in any kind of negotiations here, because the Russians are concerned about the Russian-speaking people in those territories. They're also concerned about Russian-speaking people on the other side of those territories here, which could also come into play. But at a minimum, it's going to be that. So one would think that since Witkoff is talking about it here, President Trump has talked about it. In fact, he was on Air Force One a week or so ago, I think on the 16th of March, and he specifically addressed this issue as well.
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the wars, And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. Because that's up, that's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working on that.
Okay, so that's Steve Witkoff and President Trump within the last 10 days. Very clearly, unquestionably talking about land. He said, President Trump said, we're talking to all sides, both the Ukraine and the Russian side. Steve Witkoff obviously has been doing a lot of shuttle diplomacy between all sides as well. He was in Ukraine, then he went to Moscow. So all these things are being discussed. Also in Riyadh and Jeddah, several places in Saudi Arabia. He's been talking a lot about that. It's on the front center of the agenda. So on the one hand, we're trying to get to a ceasefire so that we can talk about an end of war negotiation, which will unequivocally and obviously have to do with where the line's going to be drawn. That's the whole point of having an end of war negotiation. Ukraine recognizes that they're not going to be able to force Russia back. So by default, Zelensky, that you're going to have to give some land back. But now, despite what Witkoff just said and what President Trump himself has said, we have Zelensky at a big press briefing in Kiev yesterday, seeming to imply he's a little confused on this topic.
Вона говорить з русскими про територію.
Нас
І
це
я думаю,
турбує?
нас турбує, щоб Сполучені Штати Америки мали вплив на Росію, а не навпаки. Для нас це найважливіше. Президента Трампа достатньо сил, інструментів, санкцій, тощо різних інструментів, щоб впливати на русських, на Путіна, щоб вони закінчили цю війну. Нас турбує питання, коли вони обговорюють про нас щось без нас. Турбує, ми про це говоримо нашим партнерам. Але безумовно, ми бачимо це і чуємо в меседжах, в засобах масової інформації, з заяв офіційних діячів, про яких також ми сьогодні вже говорили, офіційних людей із Сполучених Штатів Америки. Тобто це зрозуміло, що питання територій вони піднімають. І з нами ніяких домовленостей щодо території не було.
So what are you confused about? There will be land given up. But you still see, they're talking about it without us. They are talking about it without you. They're telling you they are. They're telling you they're talking to Russia about it because President Trump and Putin have to come to an agreement on where we're going to agree to it. Where is the line going to be that we're going to say that's okay, or no, we're not going to agree to that, etc. First, that's what's going to have to happen here. And I say that first because in other circumstances, you might think that would be reversed. You might think that, well, that would be between Trump and Zelensky first, and then they would go with a unified position to Russia. That's how it should be. That's actually how it should be. But Zelensky won't agree to those things. So Trump has said, okay, I'm through dealing with you because we've been talking to you about this for months, ever since he's been in office, ever since he got elected. And it was clear he was talking to Zelensky even before he got into office. So he's had literally months to understand unequivocally and graphically what Trump's red lines are and what Trump is willing to do and what he's not willing to do, especially when it comes to the line. Now, you still see in that comment there where Zelensky was not just talking about he's got concerns that they're talking about Ukraine without Ukraine, but he also is still saying Trump has the power, the tools, and the ability to force Russia into submission, to force Russia into a just and lasting peace, which they keep using that ridiculous term because it's vacuous. It has no substance to it at all. Because it's not a just and lasting peace, because that's in the eye of the beholder. And in the Ukraine side, when they use that phrase, what they mean is Russia getting nothing. That if he had his way, a just peace, you've heard I think it was General Clark we've had on the show before, said, yeah, I think a just and lasting peace is Russia withdrawing and going back to Russia, the pre-2014 lines. Well, that's in your fantasy. It would be cool if you're a script writer for a movie. That works. But if you're talking about real life, that's not even on the table. In fact, if you're talking about real life, the question is, even the June 14 lines, the four administrative borders of those oblasts, are they going to be the only time? Or is that going to be not the minimum line? Maybe Russia's even going to take more than that. And we've been telling you a lot of traffic is percolating around Russian military channels, and also just population channels that they don't want this deal. They don't want the June 14 lines. They just want the military to go and conquer it all the way to the Dnieper River, to take Odessa, Kharkiv, up to the gates of Kiev itself. That's what many of them want. So you keep playing with fire here, Zelensky, of trying to embarrass the Trump administration. That many times they've said this is what we're doing. You just saw it. Just put two of them right there. That's what they're saying out in the open in public, in addition to what they're saying behind the scenes in the diplomatic realm. And yet he keeps going on and basically embarrassing Trump and still to this day putting out words that I'm concerned about what they're doing. I want Trump to not do what he's doing. I want Trump to put pressure on Russia. And he goes on in that briefing there to talk about, I want more sanctions, more weapons, more all this stuff. Well, that's what he's talking about, Zelensky, to the European leaders. That's why he's in Paris right now talking to Macron. That's why he's going to be talking to some more military leaders in Europe tomorrow about this coalition of the willing, which is dead on arrival. I don't know what this coalition of the willing is specifically about peacekeepers in Ukraine on the other side of a peace deal. Well, if you're not even willing to entertain the fact that you're going to lose a lot of territories, there won't be any peace deal to have a negotiated settlement to have peacekeepers in. I mean, you see where the illogic of this, of the way Zelensky is approaching this, and how it can't possibly come to any kind of positive outcome. That's where we're at right now. And it's one thing if you're talking about Zelensky, because he has long been detached from reality, as he graphically shows on a routine basis now. But it's a little more puzzling on the European side, because obviously we're in contact with all these officials at the highest levels, at the ambassadorial level, and some of these specifically about these negotiating teams. We talk to them all the time. We're very clear. Trump himself is very clear. These are my positions. This is what I'm looking for. I want this war over with. I want the killing stopped, and I want to get on to what's next. That's where he's unequivocally looking for. So why are they going to tomorrow have a meeting of the coalition of the willing for a military force that will never be deployed? Because Russia has categorically said it will never agree to NATO troops under any flag, under any circumstances, which means, France, Britain, Germany, the three biggest contingents that are talking about having their troops patrol this stuff. It'll never happen. Then why are you doing it? Why do you keep going down a path that has no possibility of success at all? Because it just keeps the gap between the United States and Europe. It keeps it open. There's no chance that narrows when you're talking something that's categorically opposite, not the Russians, but the American president. He's not going to go down that road. He's definitely not going to do anything that's going to support that, because the Russians won't agree to it. And the Russians don't have to agree to it. Unlike what Zelensky said and what apparently some in Europe believe, that the United States does not have the power to coerce Vladimir Putin to do anything. And I hate to repeat myself, but it bears repeating, especially for those who may not have seen our show before. If that was even a theoretical possibility, then you would have to say, what has the history shown here? So in the previous 3 years, you have had the United States been at the forefront of this. We have been pulling Europe along with us the whole time. We've been leading the way for it, providing over 10,000 military vehicles of various types, millions of artillery rounds, 500 million rounds of other kinds of ammunition, incredible amounts of stuff, air defense weapons, jets, intelligence support, training support. I mean, everything you can imagine, along with, hundreds of billions of dollars. Also, a lot of stuff from Europe, probably close to matching that in many cases. And what did it do on the battlefield? It didn't do anything. It continued to lose. And the Ukraine army, the men that fought with all this gear, continue to die in large numbers. And every time an experienced man dies, it'll never be replaced, his experience. You're not going to be able to get it back in the time frame of this war. It just doesn't work that way. And if anybody had any understanding of how war works and how militaries function, they would understand that really simplistically. But too many don't. But that's where we are, folks. There is this huge gap between the United States and Ukraine, between the United States and Europe, and between the whole West and the Russian side. And ironically, and not weirdly, the gap between the United States and Russia is getting closer. And he's going to be putting, Zelensky is going to be putting Trump in a position to where pretty soon he's just going to have to say, listen, you guys keep sabotaging what I'm trying to get done here and undercutting it, giving the Russians every motivation in the world to not accept a peace deal. You just keep fighting until they go past those 4 oblasts into other territories where they haven't even made claims so far. That's where we're at right now. And it just continues to puzzle me. And it's frustrating because every day these ridiculous actions at the leader level in the West means more Ukrainian men die. More Ukrainian cities are turned to rubble, and more territory will eventually be going to the Russian Federation. The very things that we say we don't want to do, our actions are facilitating. It's just so perverse because it's so avoidable. And we could end this. We could have ended it a half a dozen times really over the last 4+ years when you're going back even during the Minsk period. And every time, every year since, there's been an opportunity for that. And we've punted on that every time at the expense of Ukrainian blood. So while we claim to want to care about them and their freedom, their independence, their lives, our actions are actually ensuring more Ukrainian men die. We're going to keep watching this for you, and we're going to keep tracking it. Now, I do want to touch on one other issue, which is obviously very hot in the news here in the United States, has been since at least yesterday, with the revelation that there was a breach of protocol in how the United States conducted this attack on Yemen a week or so ago. And by now, you're probably aware that there's the issue with this. Some of the seniorest, most leaders in the United States were engaging and discussing back and forth on a civilian app called Signal, which is encrypted, but it's not secure because the United States doesn't have access to the encryption or whatever. So it's not a secure environment, but it is encrypted. So it's more than just getting on your cell phone. So you have some capability of blocking it. That's what the system was designed for, so that senior leaders, because they're always spread out all over the world, is that they can still have real-time interaction between the two and coordinate issues. That's appropriate. That's what it was designed for. It was specifically authorized by CISA. It's a cyber command group within the Homeland Security Department. So there was no problem with that. The area where you start to get into problem, though, is that is not cleared for classified information. And that is not cleared for warfighting information. That's only cleared for discussions of various administrative types. Anytime you're talking about war plans or war operations, it's got to be done on what they call the high side, which is the classified system, because those systems we have access and full control over. And you have to have encryption devices and everything else. So there's not even the possibility that a reporter can accidentally be wired into this discussion if you're on the high side stuff, which, these capabilities exist. It's still unclear why they chose to use that instead of these systems that they do have, which are secure and can be used to discuss these kinds of things. Some information here of late, though, I want to pass along. So there was a hearing. There was a Senate hearing yesterday in the Intelligence Committee, and then there's one today in the House side where they were supposed to be looking at the annual threat assessment. More on that in a second. But the issue at play here was, did the information on Signal, did that qualify as classified information or not? That's really at the heart of this. Now, just moments ago, shortly before we came on the air here, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth was out in front of his airplane when he was going to visit some troops, and he addressed the issue.
My job, as it said atop of that, everybody's seen it now, team update, is to provide updates in real time. General updates in real time, keep everybody informed. That's what I did. That's my job. The war fighters will take the fight to the enemy, and I I love what they do. And with President Trump's leadership, our enemies are on notice. We will have peace through strength, and we'll keep putting our troops first. Thank you very much. We're heading off.
Strike plan for
Okay, that's what he said. I'm just keeping them updated. And you're going to see in this clip I'm about to show you from earlier today at a House Intel security meeting, is that they're going to have a big board up where they're going to show the actual comments. And you're going to see, sure enough, on the top, it says team update. So, okay, so far, so good. But the question is going to be about the substance of what was in that update here. And that's where things get a little bit more dicey for the Secretary of Defense. Now, as you watch this, I want you to understand there's going to be two things that are not going to be talked about here. And that is the strike itself legal? And if it aside from whether it was or wasn't, is it going to be effective on the ground? Those, unfortunately, have been kind of washed over on this whole issue. Those are the most important things to discuss. And so far, the issue has been about the app. But regarding what was discussed on the app, here's what was revealed today.
Director Gabbard, you said no classified information was included in the signal chat, correct?
That's correct.
And President Trump also said there was no classified information in the signal chat. And Secretary Hegseth said nobody was texting war plans. There was absolutely no classified info in that chat. I'd like to show you the text that Secretary Hegseth actually published to the world. It says, time now, weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM we are a go for mission launch. Then it says at 12:15 Eastern, F-18s launch first strike package. F-18s are military systems, correct? Weapon systems.
They are.
Okay. 13:45, trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also, strike drones launch, MQ-9s. MQ-9s is a weapon system, correct?
They are.
Okay. I think applying the executive order as well as the DoD manual to this fact pattern, we clearly have weapon systems that have been identified. That is classified information. Now, the reason why it's important that this information not be disclosed is that we don't want the adversaries to know what's about to happen, right, sir?
Well, I would draw a small distinction there. You referenced and asked if that platform, those two platforms are weapon systems. They are, but those terms are used all across the globe in a lot of contexts. So it's really about how they're used in the context of this particular document. I just want to clarify that the use of those.
I understand.
Yeah.
In this situation, those are operational details.
They are operational details, but again, as you quoted the DoD instruction, it's about operations. So as you further go down into what are the operational details, I think as we had a discussion yesterday, the important aspect, I think all of us are very familiar.
This is classified information. This is classified information. It's a weapon system as well as sequence of strikes as well as details about the operations. And so I think that just piggybacking off of what some other members have said, using the DoD's manual as well as the executive order in operation today with the Trump administration, this text message is clearly classified information. Secretary Hegseth has disclosed military plans as well as classified information. He needs to resign immediately. He needs to resign immediately, and a full investigation needs to be undertaken with regard to whether other similar signal chats are occurring in this administration.
Now that's a pretty damning piece of information there, because he was citing the congressman was DoD definitions of what is classified information, the administration's definition of what's classified information, and they both relate to the things that are on there. Now, you can make the argument, well, Secretary Hegseth, which he does make, he is the authority that decides what is and isn't classified. So we'll see how the wordsmithing stuff plays out here. But bottom line is it's gonna be pretty uncomfortable for the Secretary of Defense here for a while, since he was I think the only one, at least on these strings here, that we're talking about what was actually happening at the time. Everybody else was basically in a listening mode or a reading mode, etc. So, along with the national security advisor, I mean, these are just going to be some tough conversations that are going to be coming up. But I want to pivot to something else, because I think that the far bigger issue here was the strike itself legal. Now, if you saw a show we did, ironically, before all this stuff blew, on the issue of the legality of this a week or so ago, talking, or not a week ago, it was even less than that, just a few days ago, we were talking about, was the strike legal against the Houthis there? Would a strike against Iran be legal in the current context of the way it's being discussed, and the possibility of, preventing them from getting a nuclear weapon, et cetera? And the answer is no, it's not legal, because it is unequivocal. This is not hard. It's not complicated. Because of the abuse of power of President Nixon in 1973, the Congress passed a clarification of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, where the sole war-making powers are to the Congress, not to the executive branch. Commander-in-Chief controls the armed forces, but he doesn't get to decide when and where they go into formation or into operation. Only the Congress does. That's the way it was designed. And so this 1973 War Powers Act, which, by the way, Nixon vetoed when it was first passed, and then they overrode the veto, something that rarely happens, when his own party said, no, the issues of right and wrong here and the issues of what the Constitution says are more important than our political aspirations here, so we're going to override this veto. And so they did. And now then, because of this law, it is unequivocal. It says that the President of the United States can only use military power in one of three categories. One is if the United States, as if there's been a congressional declaration of war. Obviously, there hasn't been one against the Houthis. The second is, has there been a specific authorization, like the AUMF that were misused a long time during the wars after 9/11? Separate issue on that, but even that still gives you the legal operation to do that. So, like when Bush went into Iraq, it was a bad idea, it was dumb, but he did have the justification by the AUMF. Congress had given specific authorization. And the third is that the United States has been attacked, or the United States Armed Forces. Now, some may say, aha, that's the deal here, because U.S. ships have been attacked in the past. That falls apart too, because the issue is exactly that the Houthis were not attacking the United States before this. And even in the past, this particular strike was not preceded by any attack by the Houthis at all. It was just a political decision on the United States. There had been in the Biden administration some attacks on U.S. ships. That is true. But all of them came because we first started attacking them. So what you can't do is to attack another force, and then when they respond, say, aha, we've been attacked, so now we're good with the AUMF. No, you're not good with the 1973 War Powers Act, because that says that if you're attacked, not if you attack somebody without authorization and then they respond, because that shows that the original sin here was the Biden administration when they first started attacking the Houthis, when we had not been attacked. So none of those categories mentioned. Therefore, the Biden administration took an illegal act. It was not justified to do so. Now, unfortunately, as everybody knows, this has become so common, hardly anyone even talks about it here. But as I have said before, you better start talking about it, because we don't want to get into a situation where the president of the United States, no matter who it is, right now we're talking about President Trump. Before we were talking about Biden and Trump before him, and Obama before that, Bush, et cetera, all the way back Clinton. I mean, it keeps going on because it's become so normalized. But one day, some chief executive is going to get us into a war by choosing to use the power that he's not vested in by the Constitution, that he's prohibited from in the law, and he's going to get us into a war that is going to cost us deeply, a war that we should not fight, that we don't want to fight. You can't. It's the reason why the founding fathers made this system with the legislative branch to being the only one that could take this war, because they don't want this. They foresaw the danger. They had seen the danger when you have a chief executive, whether a king or president or anyone who is elected. If you have a chief executive that can unilaterally, one man, choose where you're going to go to war, you could drag the whole country into war that could end up being devastating and could be destructive to the country itself. That's why you have these laws in place. And that's why we need to start paying more attention to our laws while we still can, before it has cost us anything too grievous. The second issue that's not being touched is this a policy, even aside from the legality, that can work? And I argue the answer is no. So yeah, they sent this big strike package in. Apparently there's a lot of assets in the Middle East being sent over there for apparently more air power of things that may come soon. And listen, that's not going to succeed here. They said they want to open the Red Sea lanes. Going and saying you're going to bomb the Houthis until they do that is just a losing effort. The Saudis tried it for the better part of a decade with a lot of our support, but they were unable to do it with a complete mastery of the sky and all kinds of bombs and weapons and ammunition that were used. They never succeeded. And it's very, very unlikely that we're going to either, which means that the likelihood is that we're going to get into another open-ended fight against the Houthis in the Middle East that's just going to be very costly. Now, a lot of these missiles we're using, some of them are multi-million-dollar rounds, each one of them. And apparently in response to this round, the Houthis have at least fired on 2 separate occasions against our ships, all the drones of which were knocked down. But here's the thing. If the Houthis wanted to be devious, they could say, you know what, we're going to just keep sending up these $20,000, $30,000 drones, and we're just going to keep requiring you to knock them down with $1 or $2 million interceptor missiles. Maybe one of these will end up getting through there and they'll cause real damage to the ship, or maybe they'll just deplete us. I mean, do we want to get into a situation to where for some number of months the Houthis keep flying up these cheap drones and we keep knocking them down with multi-million-dollar missiles? I mean, that is a bad investment. We don't need to get into that situation here. Look, only 3% of the world trade goes through the Red Sea there anyway, so it's limited as it is. But the Houthis have said, and they have done, that they said that this whole thing is not just because they want to. They are limiting Red Sea ships that they say is Israeli primarily, going up into the ports on Israel in support of the Palestinian people, because the Israelis have blocked off the aid to the Palestinian people there. And that's what prompted them to say they were going to get rid of their ceasefire before. That is all very clear, open on. The Houthis only started this after the Israeli side started bombing the Palestinian people. When the Israelis went to a ceasefire, so too did they. So the Houthis were good to their word. They said, if you stop the fighting and open up the food supplies, we'll stop attacking the Red Sea shipping. And they did, until Israel went back on the negotiations, and then they started blocking the food. So again, the easiest route to get the Red Sea open is to get Israel to start sending the food back in. The Houthis have shown that if you take that action, they'll stop their action. That's the lowest cost to get the biggest benefit. That's a whole lot better than get into a situation where we kill a bunch of innocent people, because there was 53 apparently killed in this mission they're talking about here, and most of those were innocent civilians. Why do we want to do that? And why do we want to have a situation to where we have to spend multi-million dollars to shoot down tens of thousands of dollars of enemy drones, which can just be manufactured really easily from their side, and something that's just not likely to be succeeded, when there's a much lower cost to get it done? So those are the things we need to be paying attention to. We need to take care of our assets. We need to take care of our moral authority, and we need not break the law. And if we do those things, we have a much better chance of succeeding, and our interests have a much better chance of being accomplished. But we keep going down these paths, and it's going to end up costing us, folks. It's not going to work, and it's going to cost us. The worst of all worlds. I'd love to see this get taken care of, and I hope some people start paying attention to it, because we are unintimidated, uncompromised here, and we're going to bring you the information you need to make sense of your world, no matter what it is, no matter who's president. We're going to do what makes sense and what is right for the American people. Thank you very much for watching us today. Really appreciate it. Be sure and like and subscribe if you haven't done it, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.